Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. My perfect husband Ethan Zhao betrayed me and without a moment's hesitation asked for a divorce, then even posted about it on WeChat. I truly wished I could go back 8 years to change the fate of Haley Song, to stop her from marrying that awful man. Haley Song, the woman who had always been Ethan's white moonlight, the one he could never forget. And then somehow we really did go back 8 years. Ethan changed Haley's fate so she wouldn't marry that terrible man while I changed mine. I chose not to stay by his side anymore. When I saw Ethan's post on WeChat, I had just finished an 8-hour surgery. On my way back to my office, exhaustion overwhelmed me and I collapsed in the hallway. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a dimly lit room filled with flashing colored lights and pounding music. Someone patted my shoulder and said, "Wow, Olivia Wu, your alcohol tolerance is terrible. You only had 1 drink and you're already out." My blurry vision slowly cleared and I saw the person standing in front of me. It was Haley Song. She was wearing a short red dress, her long wavy hair draped over her shoulders, her bright beautiful face glowing under the colorful lights. I stared at her for several seconds before stumbling into the restroom. Looking at the fair, delicate face in the mirror, I splashed cold water on my forehead again and again. Finally, I had to accept the truth. There was no scar anymore. I had gone back 8 years to my freshman year of college. That night was Haley's birthday party. I had accidentally drunk a glass of strong liquor and passed out on the sofa. When I walked out of the restroom, my head still spinning, I bumped into someone. Before I could apologize, a deep, familiar male voice said beside my ear, "Sorry, are you okay?" Instinctively, I tightened my grip on my phone and looked up. The man in front of me was tall with sharp brows and a relaxed but striking look, wearing only a loose black t-shirt. It was Ethan Zhao. Our eyes met for a few seconds. Ignoring the unreadable expression in his gaze, I lowered my head and said softly, "I'm fine," before brushing past him and heading back to the room. I had just sat down on the sofa and taken a sip of water when Ethan walked in. Haley cheerfully wrapped her arm around his and introduced him to everyone. "This is my brother Ethan Zhao. He's studying at the university next door." The flashing lights reflected off him as he slipped one hand into his pocket, lowered his gaze slightly, and nodded at us. If I didn't count that brief encounter in the hallway, this was actually the first time we met. In my previous life, Ethan was Haley's stepbrother. His father had remarried her mother, and he was also the man I had loved and been with for 6 years. He realized he loved his sister on the day Haley got married. That night he got drunk, held me tightly in his arms and kept murmuring, "Haley, Haley." At that moment I felt like I was falling into an endless void. My mind went completely blank. It wasn't until much later that I finally understood Haley was the woman he truly loved, not me. Unfortunately, that realization came when I loved him the most. I sat in the dark all night, numb and silent. The next morning I pretended nothing had happened, stayed by his side and kept believing his words, "She's just my sister." Until years later when Haley divorced her husband after catching him cheating. I saw her crying and leaning into Ethan's arms saying, "The man I've loved all along wasn't him. It was you, Ethan. Do you still want me?" She said her mother had heart disease and had threatened her with her life if she didn't stay away from him. That was why she had pretended to love someone else and arranged for Ethan and me to be together. I didn't know if her words were true, but Ethan believed her. That night he came to find me. We sat in silence for a long time before he finally said hoarsely, "Olivia, let's break up." I looked into his eyes. Before I could even ask why, though we both already knew the answer, I was called into an emergency surgery. I forced myself to stay calm and rational, suppressing every emotion that tried to surface. I spent 8 straight hours in the operating room, and when I finally stepped out, I saw Ethan Zhao's post on his Moments feed. I really wish I could go back 8 years and change Haley Song's fate so she wouldn't marry that terrible man. Now that I had truly returned to the past, I began to notice all the little details I used to overlook. Or maybe I had seen them before but deliberately ignored them. Like the birthday cake Ethan personally baked for Haley Song. Like the way he gently coaxed her to put down the bottle when she got drunk and refused to stop drinking. Or the way when the party ended, he didn't hesitate to carry her home, drunk and limp in his arms. My 2 roommates had watched him and sighed in admiration. Wow, her brother is so nice to her. At the time, I'd been just as naive, thinking he was nothing more than a caring older brother. So when later Haley developed feelings for someone else and started trying to set me up with Ethan, I actually fell for him, the handsome, thoughtful man who seemed perfect in every way. It wasn't until the truth was exposed that I finally realized his gentleness had never been meant for me. No matter the occasion, my birthday, our anniversaries, he always seemed detached and uninterested. But the moment Haley appeared, his eyes would follow her wherever she went. From the very beginning to the end, the only woman Ethan Joe ever loved was Haley. Just like now, sitting in the backseat of Ethan's car with my roommates, pretending to be asleep while he sat in the front passenger seat, watching Haley sleeping soundly beside him with such tender eyes. The cool night breeze swept through the open window, blowing a strand of hair across my cheek. In the darkness, I quietly opened my eyes. Through my blurred vision, I saw Ethan reach out toward Haley and whisper softly, "Haley, this time I won't let you marry that man again." My heart pounded violently in that moment. I closed my eyes and sank into the darkness, suddenly realizing one thing with painful clarity. Ethan had also come back to the past. He wasn't going to let Haley marry someone else, and I wasn't going to be with him ever again. When we arrived back at the dorm, I lay on my bed, a place that felt both familiar and strange. Staring up at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, the warm air brushing across my face, I rubbed my temples and tried to lull myself to sleep. In my dreams, I fell into an endless loop, reliving the same 8 years over and over, from the moment I met Ethan Joe to the moment we broke up. Again and again, I heard his voice saying, "Olivia, let's break up." The vibration of my phone dragged me out of the nightmare. I opened my eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling for a few seconds before grabbing my phone. Checking my schedule, I suddenly remembered I had a tutoring job today. I was supposed to teach English to a high school student. Seeing the time, I hurriedly got up, brushed my teeth, washed my face, grabbed a pack of bread, and caught the bus to my student's house. Thankfully, English was my subject, and since my medical career required me to read advanced academic papers, I had never neglected the language. Flipping through my lesson notes, I roughly recalled what I needed to cover. My student was a high school girl. After finishing the lesson, I helped her revise an essay her English teacher had assigned for homework. The topic was simple: me in 15 years. Propping her chin on her hand, the girl looked at me and asked, "Miss Olivia, do you think I can become a comic artist in 15 years? I answered firmly, "Of course you can." And she really would. In just 8 years, she would become a famous comic artist with a huge fan base. She then asked with a smile, "Then in 15 years, will you be a doctor?" I returned her smile. "Definitely." "Okay," she said brightly, then pointed excitedly toward the window. Outside, under the trees, a tall man was walking with a black umbrella in his hand. "That's Mr. Key," she said. I was certain that he too would one day become a physicist. Through the thin curtain of rain, I looked up and my eyes met his. My heart suddenly tightened, and memories from my past life came flooding back. He wouldn't live to see 15 years later. 2 years from now, Ethan K. would die in a car accident. His name was Ethan K., one of the brightest students under the notoriously strict devil professor of the physics department at University A. He was also the heartthrob whispered about in countless confessions across university forums, always described as someone perfect in both looks and talent. His only flaw, perhaps, was that he came from a poor family. In my memories, I hadn't interacted with him much, just a few brief encounters in the university library. But the moment that left the deepest mark happened in my junior year when I went to the hospital to visit Ethan Joe, who was sick. On my way back to campus, as I was crossing the street with several pedestrians, a speeding car ran a red light and barreled straight toward us. Amid the screams and chaos, a black Mercedes suddenly swerved in front of the oncoming vehicle. The sound of tires screeching against the asphalt was deafening, and both cars crashed hard into the divider in the distance. Instinctively, I ran toward them, but before I could get close, a loud explosion erupted. Flames shot up, blocking my view. The cicadas in the jasmine trees nearby went silent for a moment, then started buzzing again, louder than ever, piercing through the summer air. No one survived the explosion. A fragment of debris struck my forehead, leaving behind the scar I would carry for years. The incident made it to the top of the hot search. Later, The investigation revealed that the two burned bodies inside the car were the driver, a man who had lost everything to gambling and wanted revenge on society, and the other was Ethan Key. The Mercedes had belonged to his professor. That day, Ethan had been driving out to retrieve some research materials for him from another university. On the way back, he happened to encounter the accident. The internet quickly dug up every bit of information about him. His photos and stories spread everywhere. Some people were in awe of his looks and talent, mourning his death with deep regret. Others commented that even in dying, he had saved countless lives, that his death in a way carried meaning. After all, he had always been alone. His parents had both died when he was young. He'd grown up in an orphanage. The report said his mother passed away from illness when he was taking his college entrance exams. He had truly lived a lonely life, and when he died, no one grieved for him, except that his research projects were left unfinished, untouched for years because no one else could continue them. Once, I brought flowers to visit his grave and coincidentally met his professor there, a plump, middle-aged man who stood silently in front of Ethan's tombstone. When a light drizzle began to fall, the professor finally let out a heavy sigh. That boy, he could have had such a brilliant future. After that visit, I suffered from insomnia for a long time. My heart felt as if it had been submerged underwater. Heavy, aching, suffocating. I realized it was guilt and grief for the man who had once saved my life. A light tug on my wrist snapped me back to reality. I looked out the window, but Ethan Key's silhouette was already gone. Beside me, my student chirped, "Miss Olivia, I have to go to my physics class with Mr. Key now. Don't forget you promised to come early tomorrow night." Okay. I didn't fully catch what she said, but my memories from my past life told me this much. Tomorrow would be her birthday. Her parents, both busy with work, had asked me to come celebrate with her. Outside, the rain had stopped without me noticing. Warm sunlight streamed through the clouds, and I suddenly remembered something I'd once read online. Tomorrow was also Ethan's birthday. But the truth was he never celebrated it. The day he was born was also the day his father, a firefighter, had died in the line of duty. His father had sacrificed his life in a fire before he even got the chance to meet his newborn son. I thought that maybe Ethan Key wasn't someone who expected birthday wishes or celebrations. But still, that day was the day he came into this world, and it didn't deserve to be forgotten. So the next day I brought a small birthday cake and a wrapped gift with me when I arrived at my student's house, right on time just as promised. When I got there, Ethan was still teaching. The sun was setting outside the window, filling the room with the warm glow of dusk. He wore a simple white dress shirt, a sheet of test paper in one hand, standing by the desk with his head slightly lowered as he read. There was something refined and gentle in his manner, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. Watching him, I suddenly remembered a rumor from my previous life. Just a small snippet of gossip I'd once seen online. It was a blurry screenshot of a chat conversation. The source unknown and the truth uncertain. "Ethan, is there someone you like?" "Yeah, then why don't you tell her?" There was a 3-minute pause before the next reply appeared. Just silence. Despite his exceptional looks and brilliance, people found it hard to believe that a man like him could quietly harbor an unspoken love. But by the time I learned about this rumor, he was already gone. The truth had been buried forever in the dark. And if it had been true, then that love story too had never found its ending. His father had died. His mother had passed away from illness. His love was unreturned, and his career had been cut short. His whole life seemed to be made of unfinished things, of regrets that never healed. His death hadn't left many people mourning. But what he left behind were all the things he never got to complete. The research projects abandoned, the experiments no one could carry on. A physics genius like him was never meant to end his life that way. By the time class was over, the sky outside had turned completely dark. My student ran over excitedly, showing off a new set of drawing pens she'd just received. "If only Mr. Key didn't have something to do," she said with a pout. "Then the three of us could have had cake together." I hesitated for a moment, then glanced at Ethan, who was gathering his notes, getting ready to leave. Without really thinking, I blurted out, "Mr. Key." But before I could finish, the light suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. I coughed lightly, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why don't you stay, Mr. Key? We girls are kind of scared of the dark." In the quiet there was a soft click. A faint flame flickered from a lighter, casting a warm glow that danced across Ethan's face, highlighting the sharp lines of his features. He looked at me, his voice low and gentle beneath the light. I lit the candles on the small birthday cake and carefully placed it in front of him and my student. "Today," I said slowly, meaning every word, "we celebrate the day of life. May every day that follows be filled with peace and happiness." Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was regret, but no one wanted more than I did for Ethan K to truly live in peace and happiness in whatever time he had left. The dim light in the room softened as the sweet scent of the cake spread through the air. The three of us shared it together. My student, smiling brightly as she ate, handed me her recent report card and said cheerfully, "Mr. Key, Miss Olivia, guess what?" My mom said, "I've been improving so much lately that she wants to take both of you out for dinner to thank you." I flipped through the grades, remembering that in my previous life, there really had been a time when my student invited me to dinner. But that day, Haley Song had called me to take photos for one of her outdoor shoots. The thought made me glance at Ethan again, sitting quietly in the faint light, and that was when I realized something. Back then, at that very dinner, I should have met him, but I never went. This time, I refused Haley Song's invitation and agreed to go to dinner instead. But on the way there, when I tried to save a child who nearly got hit by a car, I injured my leg and had to be taken to the hospital. To prove I hadn't been careless in letting the kid climb the tree earlier that day, I even took a picture of my wound and sent it to the student's parents. It wasn't serious, just a surface scrape that burned painfully. Nothing requiring long-term hospitalization. While waiting for the doctor to address the wound, I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone and came across Haley Song's latest post. It was a photo from her photography club's activity. And of course Ethan Jiao was in it. Naturally, whenever something involved Haley, he was always there without fail. I remembered one particular night from our 4th anniversary. Haley had gotten into a fight with her boyfriend and gotten drunk at a bar. She'd called Ethan in tears, sobbing, "Ethan, I'm so heartbroken. Can you come to me?" That night, Ethan and I had just arrived at the restaurant we'd reserved. Before we could even order, he stood up and said he had to go. I offered to come along, but he shook his head. "Olivia, Haley's always been proud. She wouldn't want you to see her like that," I asked quietly. "And what about you?" He gave a faint, bitter smile. "She and I grew up together. It's different with her." Not long after that, Haley made up with her boyfriend. During one of our group dinners, she even teased, "Don't think you're the only one who loves me. There are plenty of others who do. If you keep making me mad, I might not want you anymore." Ethan had just sat there silent, drinking down a full glass of wine. The truth was, he'd always known Haley understood his feelings. She just chose to pretend she didn't so she could keep enjoying his care and attention while still staying with the man she actually liked. And as for me, all he had to say was, "She's my sister and my friend. You're different." Just those few words were enough to silence me every time. But thankfully, in this new life, I wouldn't let myself become a pawn between the two of them again. After getting my wound bandaged, I limped out of the hospital. Halfway home, the sky suddenly opened up. The rain poured down hard, and since my wound couldn't get wet, I ducked under a nearby awning, wincing from the sting, and reached for my phone to call a cab. Unfortunately, my phone battery died and shut off. The summer wind carried a damp chill, and I sat there waiting helplessly for the rain to stop. Just as I was about to give up, Ethan K. appeared, walking toward me through the downpour with an umbrella in hand. He crouched down, took off his jacket, and wrapped it gently around my leg to protect the wound from the rain. Then he handed me the umbrella, and without a word, lifted me up into his arms. "The road here's too narrow for a car," he said softly. "Let's move somewhere else. It'll be easier to get a ride." Startled, I looked up at him. The clean, cool scent of his body lingered close to my ear, and my heart began to race as I stared at his sharp, calm profile. When we finally got into the car, I asked why he'd come. He replied evenly, "Your student's mother was worried about you, but she was stuck in a meeting. She asked me to check on you. When I couldn't reach you, I went looking and finally found you. Maybe it was because of the rain, but the air inside the car felt stifling." I rolled the window down slightly and couldn't help imagining how long he must have searched for me in the storm. By the time we reached the campus gate, the rain had stopped. Ethan helped me out of the car, then carried me all the way to the dorm entrance. Before he left, I thanked him sincerely. He looked down at me with a faint smile. "No need to be so polite, Miss Wu." When I got back to my room, I realized his jacket was still wrapped around my leg. So, a few days later, I made my way to the university to return it to him. Autumn had arrived. Because of the leg injury and the light drizzle that fell almost every day, I hadn't been going out much. On the weekend, when the weather finally cleared, I decided to find Ethan K. But when I arrived, I realized I'd been too impulsive. I didn't even know exactly where to look. Finding someone under those circumstances was like searching for a needle in a haystack. In the end, I didn't find Ethan, but I unexpectedly ran into Ethan Joe instead. As I passed by the basketball court, amid the loud cheers and shouts, someone suddenly screamed, "Call an ambulance." "He's fainted," someone shouted. My instincts as a doctor kicked in immediately. I rushed forward, pushing through the crowd. A male student was lying unconscious on the basketball court. I knelt beside him without hesitation, checked his breathing, and began performing CPR. After about 15 minutes, the boy finally regained consciousness just as the campus clinic's medical team arrived. Relieved, I slowly stood up, ready to leave until I accidentally met Ethan Zio's eyes from across the court. I had no idea how long he'd been standing there watching me. He was wearing a red and black basketball uniform, tall and striking in the middle of the crowd. I quickly looked away, picked up my jacket and turned to leave. Behind me, I heard one of the players ask curiously, "Ethan, you know her?" "No," he said flatly. I hugged my jacket to my chest and stepped into a nearby bakery to rest and regain some strength. The wind chime above the door jingled softly as I walked in, a delicate, calming sound. Feeling a little bored, I opened my phone and started a quick game of tic-tac-toe. Then the chime rang again. I looked up and there he was. Ethan K. stood in front of me. The game was over. Notifications sounded from my phone as I froze in surprise. "What a coincidence," I said, smiling awkwardly. But he raised an eyebrow and replied calmly, "Not a coincidence. I came to find you." Seeing my puzzled expression, he pulled out his phone and handed it to me. On the screen was a confession board post and an online thread titled "Find This Person." It was a photo of me performing CPR on the basketball court, captioned, "Within 3 minutes, I want to know everything about this girl." The post had only been up for 30 minutes, yet it already had hundreds of comments. Most were just curious bystanders, but a few were trying to piece things together. "Look at how professional her CPR technique is. She's probably a med student from the university across the street. Why was she on our campus, though? The jacket she's holding looks like a guy's. Maybe her boyfriend's." I didn't bother reading any further. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I handed him back his jacket, the one I had already washed and neatly folded. "Here," I said softly. "I cleaned it for you." That night, when I returned to the dorm, my nosy roommate rushed over with her phone. "Look at this," she said, eyes gleaming. On her screen was a new post on the same confession board. "Case solved. She's the girlfriend of Ethan K. from the physics department." The attached photo showed me handing Ethan his jacket in the bakery, tinted with a soft pink filter that made the scene look suspiciously intimate. While my roommate was buzzing with gossip-fueled excitement, I quickly explained the truth from start to finish. After listening, she pouted a little but still teased, "Well, even if it's not true, he seems like a catch. You should at least have a little crush." I couldn't help but laugh helplessly. Later, I opened WeChat and looked at his profile. His display name was simply Ethan K., and his avatar was a white paper crane. After a moment's thought, I changed his contact name to Mr. K. His personal page was spotless. No photos, no updates, just a single line of text. "The wind has begun to rise." The timestamp showed it had been posted the day we first met. For some reason, that line stirred something deep in me. I suddenly remembered another path fate had once taken on the 6th anniversary of his death after a summer rain had cleared. The sunset filled the sky with gold. I had gone to visit his grave, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. My shadow stretched across the gravestone as I stood there, staring at his black and white portrait, so calm, so gentle. Then the wind had risen again. My loose hair had blown across my shoulder, leaves rustling against each other. as if the world itself were whispering a message that fate was beginning a new chapter. And then time had reversed, sending me back to the past. We met again. Luckily, this time I had returned before ever meeting Ethan Zhao. Rather than waste my new life seeking revenge or reliving the pain of that relationship, I decided I'd rather be a stranger to him, someone with no connection at all, just like what he'd said that day on the basketball court. I don't know her. My freshman year ended in chaos and haste. If my memory served me right, among the incoming freshmen at University A, there would soon be someone Haley Song liked, a junior directly under Ethan Zhao's mentorship. And just as it had happened in my previous life, everything began again at a party organized by Ethan Zhao. The two of them had met, and soon after that, Haley Song began to like the younger guy. She even started playing matchmaker between me and Ethan Zhao. Through one coincidence after another, each one carefully orchestrated by her, Ethan eventually asked me out. But now things were different. Ethan had returned to the past too, to the time before Haley met that younger man. I figured he would stop them from getting involved and that in the end, he would end up with Haley again. That seemed like the fate waiting to play out. Except fate always had a way of being unpredictable. During the final exam before winter break, I was sitting in the back right corner of the lecture hall, right behind Haley. I had just finished my paper and was about to turn it in when I saw her. She'd been asleep at her desk the whole time. Suddenly, she jerked awake, glanced at her test sheet, then looked around frantically before grabbing her bewildered deskmate and shouting, "What year is it right now? Tell me, what year is it?" I silently watched her trembling shoulders from behind, then stood up, turned in my paper and walked out. Outside the classroom, Ethan Zhao was waiting for her. As I passed by, he suddenly called out, "Olivia." I stopped confused and turned around. His expression was dark. "Are you with him now?" he asked. I had no idea what he meant. My tone stayed calm. "What does that have to do with you?" And with that I walked away. Because of the long holiday break, I didn't see him again for quite a while. At first, I honestly thought this second chance between him and Haley would turn into the love story they never finished before. A mutual happy ending they both deserved. But I was wrong. Haley didn't choose Ethan again. Even after coming back, she still fell for that same junior from his department. So all those tearful words she'd said in our last life about being forced, about regretting her choices, had been lies. What was even more surprising was that this time she didn't try to pair me with Ethan anymore. Instead, she started playing matchmaker between Ethan and Lily Jiang, the very woman who in our previous life would become the reason Haley's husband cheated on her. I didn't know what had happened between them during the break. But when we met again, Haley and Lily had somehow become close friends. The night air was cool as I walked back toward the dorm with my books in hand. From a distance, I saw Ethan Zhao and Haley Song standing under the dorm building talking. I didn't slow my pace, but as I passed them, their voices drifted to my ears. Ethan's tone was low but firm. "Haley, I'm telling you again, she's not a good person. You're too naive. If you don't stay away from her, she'll trick you sooner or later." Haley's sweet, pleading voice followed. "Please, Ethan, trust me. You just don't understand her yet. She's really a good person. Give her a chance, okay? Please." 2 months later, Haley went public with her new relationship. It happened on a weekend. I was at a small gathering when I ran into Ethan Zhao, drunk and stumbling. After leaving the restroom, I was walking down the hallway outside the private dining room when he suddenly appeared, grabbed my arm and pulled me against him. The smell of alcohol clung to him, sharp and suffocating. The more I struggled, the tighter his arms locked around me. His voice, low and hoarse, brushed against my ear. "Haley, why are you with him? He's going to hurt you. You were forced into it, right? You still love me. I know you do. You love me, don't you?" Before I could react, before I could even kick him away, the grip on my arm suddenly loosened. A moment later, Ethan was yanked backward. Someone had grabbed his wrist and thrown him to the ground. I stumbled, nearly falling, but a strong arm caught me around the waist just in time. It was Ethan K. He'd been at the same venue that night for a departmental celebration, and while stepping out to get some fresh air, he had walked right into this scene. Maybe the pain sobered Ethan Zhao up a little. He leaned against the wall, unsteady, frowning as he stared at me. "Olivia Wu," he muttered, his voice rough. I didn't respond. I just took Ethan K's hand, intending to leave. But Ethan's mocking voice echoed behind me. You must be proud of yourself, huh, Olivia? I know you've always liked me. Now that you see me and Haley can't be together, you're enjoying it, aren't you? Huh. So what if you're with him? He's doomed anyway. People like him, no matter how long they live, they die in the end. I froze. I knew that right now he was caught between the memories and emotions of 2 lifetimes. His mind fractured and unstable. He wasn't thinking clearly, just lashing out to wound anyone nearby. I didn't care what he said about me, but he shouldn't have said that about Ethan K. I stopped walking, turned around and faced him. He was still glaring at us with that same arrogant, bitter expression. Word by word, I told him firmly, "Shut your mouth, Ethan. He's not going to die." I came back to change his fate. My voice trembled slightly, but my conviction didn't. I might not be able to go back far enough to save his father, who died in that fire, or his mother, who passed away from illness, but I'm here now to save him. My thoughts were a blur as we stepped out of the hotel. A car honked sharply as it passed by, snapping me back to reality. That's when I realized I was still holding Ethan Key's hand. His palm was warm and slightly damp. I hesitated, then quickly let go, hiding my hand behind my back and clenching it. "Sorry," I said softly. "I forgot." I paused, then added, "And thank you for earlier." His relaxed fingers curled into a fist. He looked down at me and asked quietly, "When?" My heart skipped a beat. I cut him off in a rush. He was wrong. He was just rambling nonsense. Don't believe anything he said. Ethan, you have a bright future ahead of you. You have so much time, so much life waiting for you. We looked at each other for a few seconds. Then he smiled faintly and asked, "And what about you, Olivia? You'll become an excellent doctor one day, right?" I smiled back, bright and sure. "As long as I'm alive, I'll do everything I can to save people." In the end, Haley Song failed to successfully pair up Ethan Joe and Lily Jiang. But Lily, ironically, developed feelings for Ethan herself and started clinging to him constantly. In a way, Haley's plan still worked because now Lily wouldn't be the woman who'd steal her husband in the future. What Haley didn't expect, though, was that Ethan Jiao had also come back from his previous life. He still stubbornly clung to the lie Haley had told him before. Her so-called confession that she'd only left him because she'd been forced to. That lie had been his oxygen mask, keeping him alive as he drifted helplessly in a sea of longing and heartbreak. But the one who tore that mask off was Haley herself. It happened at a party I didn't attend. That night, my 2 roommates returned to the dorm looking unsettled and told me everything. Haley had gotten drunk and slapped Lily across the face, calling her a shameless homewrecker. No one could stop her. The more her boyfriend tried to hold her back, the wilder she became. But the strangest part, they said, was that her brother, Ethan Jiao, had stood by calmly, watching the whole scene without interfering. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. I understood that calm wasn't detachment. It was defeat. Ethan had finally realized the truth. Haley, too, had come back from the past. But instead of choosing him this time, she had used him, turning him into a tool to block Lily's path. Ethan Jiao had become nothing more than a pathetic joke in Haley's new story. For a long time after that, I didn't see him around her anymore. But Haley didn't seem to care. Later, when I visited University A to see Ethan K, I ran into Ethan Joe a few times. The most memorable encounter was one evening when Ethan K and I went to a newly opened restaurant near campus for dinner. On our way back, as we passed by a small street barbecue stall, a sudden commotion broke out. Someone was fighting. Ethan Joe was among the people involved in the fight. The scene had turned into complete chaos. Shouts, curses, and the sound of tables and bottles breaking filled the air. A shattered piece of a beer bottle flew wildly across the crowd, heading straight toward me. Ethan K reacted instantly, pulling me into his arms. The glass shard grazed his cheek, leaving a thin red scratch. I gasped in horror. "Ethan!" He quickly led me into a small dumpling shop across the street to calm me down. "It's okay. Don't be afraid," he said softly. Before the police arrived, the chaos outside began to settle. I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag and carefully cleaned the cut on his face. Then, rummaging in my pocket, I found a small green cartoon bandage. As I leaned forward to stick it gently on his cheek, the door of the shop swung open. Ethan Joe walked in along with several of the men who'd been in the fight. All of them were bruised or bleeding in some way. There was still a faint streak of blood on Ethan's lip that he hadn't managed to wipe clean. While they muttered angrily, complaining about their rivals, I stayed quiet, finishing the bandage on Ethan Key's face. Suddenly, Ethan Joe slammed his foot against a table and shouted furiously, "Shut up already. Damn it." The next day, he cornered me in the school courtyard. Light snow was falling. The bruise on his face had darkened and his expression was complicated. "Olivia," he said quietly, "you and him, you'll never work out. I'm telling you this for your own good. Don't fall for him." My face turned cold. I turned to leave, saying flatly, "I'm not a psychiatrist. Don't come to me with your problems." Behind me, his voice followed, half mocking, half bitter. "Olivia, the one you should have loved was me." My whole life had been calm and steady except for one disaster. Meeting Ethan Joe and Haley Song and wasting 6 years of my youth on them. But Ethan Key, he was the man I owed my life to. When I first came back from my previous life, I thought my purpose was to change my fate with Ethan K. To fix what had gone wrong. But later I realized I was wrong. One afternoon near the end of sophomore year, I woke up from a nightmare during a nap. In the dream, I was back at that intersection. I was crossing the street with a group of people when a speeding car came roaring toward us. Amid the chaos, I saw the black Mercedes swerve in front of the other car, and then explode. The ceiling fan of my dorm bed was weakly blowing air through my hair. I lay there staring blankly at the ceiling, my heart pounding. I'd always known this was a problem with no solution. Other than the official explanation that the driver had intentionally caused the crash out of revenge against society, I never learned anything more about him. Maybe I could save Ethan K. Maybe I could stop myself from being at that intersection that day. But what about everyone else who had been there? The elderly, the children, the pregnant women, the students. Who would save them? Once in desperation, I had gone to the police with what little I knew. But the officer I spoke to just sighed. "Miss," he said gently, "maybe you've been watching too many sci-fi movies. We solve crimes with evidence, not superstition." By June, exam season for university entrance had arrived. My tutoring work with Ethan K. was coming to an end. By that point, I'd known him for almost 2 years. In all that time, I had never once seen him with a girl, nor heard him mention anyone special. I was almost certain that rumor, the one about the blurry photo of his supposed crush, had been fake. Still, I sometimes wondered what kind of person he might like. Maybe someone beautiful, maybe someone smart, someone brilliant like him. Whoever she was, she had to be extraordinary. That evening, our students' parents invited us to dinner to thank us for our help. By the time we finished, the sky was already dark. We walked back together side by side, down a narrow alley under the moonlight. Maybe it was because we both knew this would be our last meeting for a while. Or maybe it was just that the quiet of night made everything feel a little melancholic. As we passed beneath a dim streetlight, I tried to sound casual. "Ethan," I asked softly, "is there someone you like?" He was silent for a long moment before answering. "It doesn't matter." "Why?" I asked softly. "If one day you fall for someone, you should tell her. Don't hide it in your heart. If you say it out loud, at least you'll have a chance." After those words, we stopped at the fork in the road. Ethan K. turned to me, his expression unusually serious. "Olivia Wu," he said quietly. "Thank you." I thought he was thanking me for the advice, so I just smiled and didn't think much of it. The days that followed passed as usual, calm and ordinary, until the day before the one when he was supposed to die in my previous life. His professor had asked him to drive out the next morning to pick up a set of research documents. When I found out, I suggested, "Can you go in the afternoon instead? I have movie tickets for the morning. Come watch with me." He agreed. The movie I chose was random, but by coincidence it was a time travel film. The synopsis read, "The heroine travels back in time to make up for the regrets of the man she loves. But when they finally fall in love again, she realizes it was all just a dream." I never finished that movie. Halfway through, while Ethan K. was still focused on the screen, I whispered that I needed to step out for a moment. Everything felt so normal, so ordinary, just like any other day before it. Leaving the theater, I got into the rental car I prepared and drove toward the intersection. On the way there, a sudden thought hit me. Maybe our meeting was never meant to lead to love. Maybe it was always meant to lead to this moment of parting. Ethan, I murmured to myself, this time, you'll be the one to see the future of this world. When I arrived at the intersection, I saw the familiar crowd crossing the street just like before. I waited for the car for the moment that would decide everything. But then before I could even react, an explosion erupted nearby. My heart stopped. My mind went blank. I jumped out of the car and ran toward the sound while dialing his number. No one picked up. When I reached the burning wreckage, my vision blurred with tears. The heat, the smoke, the chaos. It all blended into one unbearable scene. I could barely stand. The last thing I remembered was the overwhelming realization that I still hadn't saved him. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital bed. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. My phone rested on the nightstand beside a white doctor's coat. The familiar nurse leaning over me said gently, "You were unconscious for about 20 minutes. 8 years had passed." I looked at the white curtains fluttering in the wind and couldn't tell anymore. Had I dreamed of the past? Or was this the dream? It wasn't until I stumbled into the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked in the mirror that I saw it. The scar on my forehead was gone completely. That was when I knew for certain I had traveled back in time. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, opened the browser, and searched for reports about the accident. After digging through the archives, I found one small article from years ago. Just a short summary. No headlines, no follow-up reports, no mention of Ethan Key, not even a grave. It was as if everything, the tragedy, all of it had vanished. I asked around, desperate. Do you remember the car accident 6 years ago? The one that was trending everywhere. But the answers were always the same. Olivia, are you sure you're not misremembering? I think there was an accident, but it never made the news. 6 years ago? That's such a long time. Maybe I just don't remember. Ethan had no family. His classmates had scattered all over the country. I went to his university searching for his old professor, the one from my memories, but they told me he had gone abroad years ago. I couldn't find anything. Not a single person, not a single record that proved he had ever existed. The only evidence left of our connection was a single WeChat message, his last one to me. It was his reply confirming our movie plan the day before the accident. And after that, 6 years of silence, a complete void. I typed, then deleted, then typed again in our old chat window over and over. Yet, I never found the courage to send the message. I was terrified it would become another text that would never get a reply. As long as I didn't try to confirm the truth, I could still pretend he was alive somewhere. I developed a habit of wandering around University A whenever I had free time. More often than not, my steps would unconsciously lead me toward the small lake we used to visit together. Ethan Key's lab was nearby on the first floor of the science building. Through the tall glass windows, I would sometimes imagine I saw him there, wearing a white lab coat, head bent as he scribbled notes across a sheet of paper. But in the next blink, the image would dissolve into nothing. On the second day after I came back, Ethan Joe showed up to see me. He said he didn't want a divorce anymore, that everything had been said in anger. He begged me to believe him one last time. As he lowered himself, pleading with such desperation, I put down my pen, looked up calmly and asked, "Ethan, were we ever really together?" His face drained of color instantly. The truth was, he had no proof, none to show that we'd ever been a couple. When time had rewound, not only had Ethan Key's accident vanished from the public record, but the 6-year relationship between Ethan Joe and me had also ceased to exist. Fate had pulled the four of us, me, Ethan Joe, Haley Song, and Lily Jiang, back to 8 years ago. He wanted to rewrite the ending, to stop Haley from marrying the man who'd ruined her life, and to claim her for himself. That was why he'd altered his connection to me. Even when he finally realized he'd only been a pawn in Haley's game, the reality was this. There was no longer any link between us. Ethan Joe lost his mind after that. He tried everything to prove that we had once been together, digging for photos, records, messages, but it was all useless. On WeChat, we had no mutual friends. Every picture he found only showed him alone. Our contacts didn't overlap, and every camera in every place we had ever been together showed no trace of me. Time passed. My colleagues, who once gossiped out of curiosity, eventually sighed in pity. "Such a handsome guy," they whispered. How could he be so mentally unstable? I smiled faintly. When I saw Ethan show up again one day, I simply told him, "Go out that door, turn left, and check in with psychiatry." No matter how firmly I denied our past, the only person who knew the truth, that we had once been together, was Haley Song. After coming back, she was betrayed all over again. Even though she had prevented Lily and her husband from being together this time, people who want to cheat will always find a way to cheat. While Ethan Joe was still entangled with me, he was being hounded not only by Lily but also by Haley, who clung to him desperately. She cried. She pleaded. She talked about how much she loved him and how helpless she'd been. At first, Ethan faced her coldly, but eventually his patience wore thin. One day, after he refused to see her, Haley came to my workplace and caused a scene. I stood quietly and watched her until security arrived. Then, in the same tone I had once used with Ethan, I told her calmly, "Go out the door, turn left, and check in with psychiatry." My coworkers sighed again. "They really are made for each other," one of them muttered. "Neither of them is normal." After that, things quieted down for a while. The next time I saw them, about a month later, I was at the lab department to pick up a report from a colleague. From a distance, I spotted Ethan Joe throwing a stack of papers furiously at 3 people across from him. I didn't stop to look. I just turned and left. Later, through my colleague, I learned what had happened. Apparently, Haley Song's mother had found out that her daughter had been chasing after Ethan again, and she had stepped in firmly to stop it. In that moment, a truth came out that Ethan Xiao hadn't expected. Through a DNA test, it was confirmed that he and Haley Song shared the same father. They were half-siblings, born just 3 months apart. That meant Ethan's father had cheated on his wife while she was pregnant with him. The very lie Haley once told to manipulate him, "My mother won't let us be together," had in the end turned out to be true. By mid-May, I was invited to give a university seminar on emergency medical techniques. The auditorium was packed. When the lecture ended, I began gathering my materials to leave. As I looked up, I thought I saw a familiar figure in the dispersing crowd. But before I could be sure, that silhouette disappeared. It was dusk by the time I stepped out of the building. A fine drizzle had begun to fall. I hesitated for a moment, then lifted the stack of papers in my hands to cover my head, ready to make a run for it, when suddenly a black umbrella opened above me. That faint, clean scent of dried grapefruit brushed past me on the breeze. Raindrops rolled off the edge of the umbrella, and my heart skipped a beat. Still holding the papers halfway over my head, I slowly turned around. It was Ethan Key, the man I hadn't seen in 6 years. He looked the same as I remembered. Sharp eyes, calm and composed, his features defined and resolute. After the car accident all those years ago, his professor had taken him abroad for treatment. He'd been in a coma for almost 2 years. When he finally woke up, he stayed overseas for rehabilitation and further study. Only recently had he returned to the country, now as a physics professor at a major research institute affiliated with this very university. That was how he summarized 6 years of his life in a few simple sentences. I blinked, and all the thousands of things I wanted to say over the years dissolved into just 2 words. "You're alive." My voice trembled. That's really good. Once he had been Professor Key to me. Now he was Dr. Key. But one thing hadn't changed. He was still adored by countless female students. I'd even heard that when he lectured, the classroom filled up so much that some students had to stand outside the door just to listen. Out of curiosity, I had wanted to drop by and see his class once. But as fate would have it, that day he'd switched teaching times with another professor without notice. By the time I realized it, it was too late. I was already sitting in the wrong lecture hall near the window in the back. Standing up now would only cause a scene, so I decided to quietly sit through part of the class before slipping out. Halfway through the lecture, I sent him a message. "I came to listen to your class, but I think I'm in the wrong room. What should I do now?" Just after I hit send, the professor in front called on me to answer a question. I froze. On the board was a long, complex geology problem, completely out of my field. I took a deep breath, ready to apologize for being in the wrong class, when suddenly a low voice came from behind me. "The Hadean era." Without thinking, I repeated it aloud. "The Hades era." "Correct. You can sit down," the professor said. I sat, my heart racing. My phone screen stayed dark. No new messages. But that voice. I turned around to thank whoever had helped me and froze. It was Ethan Key. He wore a black hoodie with the hood drawn low, a few strands of hair shadowing his eyes. For a fleeting second it felt like seeing him from 8 years ago. Young, quiet, familiar. I quickly turned back around, still dazed, trying to think of what to say when my phone buzzed in my lap. It was a message from him. I happened to see you walk into this room. I just wanted to find out which subject Dr. Wu is so curious about that she came to listen in person. Above that message was my own, sent only minutes earlier. My phone buzzed again. A new message from him lit up the screen. Ah, so this was my class after all. It seemed that after 6 years, Ethan Key had changed a little. He was still calm and reserved, still carried that quiet, distant aura. But now there was something softer about him, a quiet warmth that hadn't been there before. From that day on, our connection began to fall back into its old rhythm, just like 6 years ago. And yet there was something different between us. Something subtle but undeniable. At first, I couldn't quite tell what that difference was. Not until one afternoon when I visited the university to see him. As I walked down the hallway toward his office, I overheard voices from an open door nearby. His colleagues were talking. One of them sounded troubled, sighing heavily. "Professor Key, what should I do to let her know I like her?" the man asked. "Ah, you wouldn't understand this kind of suffering. I bet you've never had this problem." Ethan didn't answer, and the man pressed on with a teasing laugh. "Come on, be honest. You've turned down so many people. Don't tell me it's because you already like someone, huh?" There was a short pause, then a quiet hum of acknowledgement from Ethan. I froze, holding my breath. Then without making a sound, I turned and walked away. 6 years is a long time. Long enough to change everything. I could no longer deny it. I liked him. Somewhere along the way, the guilt and protectiveness I once felt toward him had shifted into something else. I couldn't even remember when that change began. But even then, I knew some things were better left unsaid. If I already knew there could never be an ending, the only choice left was restraint. For a long time I kept my distance, letting time pass quietly between us. Until that spring, when the warm wind began to stir again, and my carefully buried feelings started to surface once more. I began using work as an excuse, volunteering for extra shifts, staying late at the hospital so that I'd see him less. I tried to keep our relationship balanced, neither too close nor too far. That was until one week when he came to my clinic 3 days in a row. By the third day I sighed helplessly. "Ethan, you don't have to come here every day," I told him. He looked up at me, stubborn but serious. "I already took a number. I'm here for my appointment." "I mean," I said, lowering my voice, "you don't have to come for checkups every day. It's not that serious." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded strained, like he was holding something back. "Actually, I didn't come for a checkup." He never got to finish. The clinic door suddenly burst open, slamming hard against the wall. A man stormed in, wild-eyed, furious, clutching a knife. I recognized him immediately. He was the husband of a woman who had committed suicide after years of domestic abuse. She had been brought to the hospital, but despite every effort, we couldn't save her. He blamed the doctors for her death or my failure. His face twisted with rage as he raised the knife and shouted, "You're the one who killed my wife." Before I could react, chaos erupted. Nurses screamed. People rushed to intervene. In the struggle that followed, Ethan stepped in front of me and the knife slashed across his shoulder. By the time the man was restrained, Ethan's shirt was soaked with blood. The wound was deep, 10 stitches across his right shoulder. Later, I stood by his hospital bed, staring at his pale face and the steady rhythm of the monitor beeping beside him. A tightness gripped my chest, and when I finally spoke, my voice came out low and hoarse. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Whether it's before or now, I keep getting you hurt because of me." 2 weeks later, when he was discharged, I drove him home. As we reached his apartment, I said carefully, "Ethan, maybe I should hire a male caretaker for you. Otherwise people might misunderstand." He was typing something on his phone but paused, turning to look at me. "Misunderstand what?" Silence filled the car. A soft breeze slipped through the open window, lifting his bangs slightly. The reflection of the lake shimmered through the glass, calm and clear, while inside me ripples spread wide and deep. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, staring straight ahead without answering. He refused the idea of hiring anyone else. "I don't like strangers in my space," he said simply. So I took it upon myself. Not that he needed much help anyway. I just started cooking lunch for him in the mornings before work. We'd have breakfast together. Then I'd head to the hospital. At night, we'd share dinner before parting ways. Day by day, that quiet routine began to feel strangely natural. And somewhere deep inside me, something began to change. One evening, because I couldn't turn down my colleague's invitation to her birthday party, I called Ethan to tell him I'd be home late. On the way back, my car broke down. A male coworker who lived nearby offered to drive me home. As soon as I opened the door, a sharp, sour smell hit me. Ethan was sitting at the dining table, chopsticks in hand, stirring the food in his bowl. "What are you eating?" I asked, puzzled. He looked up completely calm. "Can't you tell?" I walked over to the table. In front of him was a plate of takeout dumplings, and his small dipping dish was filled to the brim with vinegar. I sighed, went into the kitchen, and made him a new bowl of noodles. Then I opened the windows to let the air circulate. "Next time, don't eat like that again," I said. "The smell of vinegar is too strong." He lowered his head and quietly ate the noodles without responding. The next day, one of his colleagues, the same man who had once asked him if he liked someone, came by to visit him. And at that moment, a truth I'd been trying to forget resurfaced. Ethan had someone he liked. I didn't know what that coworker had said to him, but afterward, his mood seemed different, and once again, I found myself blaming my own heart for caring too much. That evening during dinner, I said softly, "Your wound is almost healed now." He gave a small nod. "Huh." After we ate, I went to the bathroom to prepare warm water for his bath, reminding him not to let it touch the stitches. When I turned to leave, my foot slipped on the wet tile. I nearly fell, but Ethan caught me just in time, pulling me into his arms. My heart pounded violently, though I couldn't tell if it was his heartbeat or mine. A few seconds later, I tried to stand, but his arms stayed firmly around my waist, holding me still. The soft haze of steam filled the air. The spot where our bodies met burned with a sudden unspoken tension. He lowered his head. His eyes were no longer calm and distant. They were darker, deeper, carrying something I couldn't name. His voice came low and rough. "Olivia," he said, "I have to tell you something." "What is it?" I asked. "I have feelings for you." My mind went blank. My pulse quickened until it drowned out every trace of reason. Without thinking, I blurted out the words I'd overheard days before. "Someone asked you if you like someone, and you said me." The next moment, his grip on my waist tightened. He turned me gently but firmly, pressing me back against the sink. With his other hand, he reached toward the fogged mirror, his fingertip tracing slow, deliberate strokes until the word appeared, "Olivia." Not long after that night, we became a couple. And for the first time, I asked him the question that had been buried inside me for years. "Why didn't you ever contact me in those 6 years you were abroad?" He was sitting on the couch reading a physics journal. When he heard me, he set it aside and pulled me into his arms. That faint scent of dried grapefruit on his skin filled the air. His voice came out husky. "I was afraid," he admitted. I started to ask what he meant, but he hugged me tighter and continued. "I was afraid I'd become someone who wasn't good enough for you. Afraid that if I reached out, I'd start wanting more. And most of all, afraid that you might already have someone else." A bittersweet ache bloomed in my chest, and my eyes stung. I wrapped my arms around him and whispered, "Ethan, you really are amazing to come this far through everything you faced and still end up here with me." He chuckled softly, his hand sliding along my waist, and murmured, "I can do other things pretty well too. Would Dr. Wu like to find out?" The warmth in the room shattered instantly into laughter and heat. After that night, he often proved his point through action, and whenever he did, he'd tease, whispering between breaths, "So am I good?" I never answered, and he never stopped asking. Half a year later, he took me to visit his parents' graves. When I saw the photo of his mother on the headstone, I froze. She was a beautiful, gentle-looking woman. Yet her illness had consumed her so completely that in the end, she was unrecognizable. When she passed away, I was there. My mother had been her attending physician. Back in my senior year of high school, every time I went to the hospital to find my mom, I'd see that woman. If my mother wasn't in her office, I'd wait in her patient's room instead. After seeing her several times, we grew close. I would bring her flowers, cut fruit for her, fold paper cranes, and chat quietly by her bedside until just before the college entrance exam, when she passed away. That was the first time I had ever faced terminal illness and death so directly. That day, I finally understood why my parents were always so busy, why they barely had time for me. When it came time to choose a major, I picked medicine, the very field I used to hate most. Back then, I thought only cancer was incurable. But after studying medicine, I realized there are very few illnesses that can truly be cured completely. What I never imagined was that the woman I'd bonded with all those years ago was Ethan Key's mother. On the way back from the cemetery, I leaned against the car window watching the trees blur past and said softly, "Ethan, actually, I met your mother a long time ago." He replied calmly, "Yeah, I know." I froze for a moment, realizing he must have seen me back then. Half a year later, on a late afternoon, I ran into Ethan Joe again. That day, Ethan K had texted me saying he'd be at the hospital in 10 minutes. I changed out of my scrubs, ready to leave my shift. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside, and there he was. Ethan Joe looked pale, his figure thinner than I remembered. The elevator was silent, just the two of us inside. When it stopped on the first floor, I stepped out immediately, but he grabbed my wrist from behind. "Olivia," he said quietly, "can we talk for a minute?" I pulled my hand free, frowning. "Ethan Joe, let's stop wasting each other's time." He gave a small, bitter laugh, as if he had expected that answer. "You probably won't believe me," he said, "but in another timeline, we were together for 6 years." I said nothing and turned to leave. His low voice followed me. "It's a pity I didn't treat you right and I lost you." My steps faltered for half a second, but I didn't look back. I just kept walking forward. Outside the hospital lobby near the flower beds, Ethan K was waiting for me. The evening sun cast a soft glow over his figure. For some reason, I suddenly remembered something from years ago, when one of our students' parents had invited us to dinner. I'd arrived early to thank them for their kindness when I'd been hospitalized. But the parent had smiled and said, "I didn't tell Ethan to visit you. I only mentioned that you'd been hurt and couldn't come." Then he said he needed to head back to school for something and left right away. So that's what happened. While I was lost in thought, his hand slipped into mine, breaking the silence. The wind lifted a few loose strands of my hair, and he gently tucked them behind my ear. I smiled, looping my arm through his and resting lightly against his shoulder. "The wind's picking up," I said softly. Ethan Joe's POV. People online used to say one thing about me: dying alone is better than ruining other people's lives. But the truth is, I'm not that noble. The instinct to live, to cling to life, is part of being human. Still, if among those caught in the crossfire, there was someone I truly cared about, I'd trade my life to save hers without hesitation. After the explosion, when I came to, I found myself trapped inside a cemetery. I sat on an old sofa in the waiting room of the memorial hall. I had just opened a bottle of water when the door creaked open. Olivia Wu walked in. In the days that followed, the only person who ever came to visit me there was Olivia Wu. She rarely spoke. Most of the time, she would lay flowers in front of my grave, tidy up the area, and sit quietly for a while before leaving. The first time I heard her speak was on the 4th anniversary of my death. That day, no one else came. In the soft drizzle, she stood before my tombstone, her head bowed slightly as she looked at my photo, her voice steady, almost like a promise. "Ethan," she whispered, "don't worry, I won't forget you." That was the first time she ever said my name aloud. I never would have imagined. Our fate began with death. But if I could live it all over again, I would still choose the same path. So when I suddenly returned to 8 years ago, I chose the same ending once more. I knew she had come back too. I knew her closeness carried guilt and the desire to make amends. But that was enough for me. At least that was better than never having known her in the first place, wasn't it? In those long solitary years, time used to feel endless, stretched thin, like an eternity that would never end. But the 2 years I spent knowing her were the first time in my life I ever felt how short time could be. If fate never allowed me to be the man she loved, then being the one she could never forget wasn't such a bad ending either. The truth is, I don't remember the face of the man who caused the crash. I never even saw his license plate. But I do remember one thing. Before he reached the intersection, he threw several empty beer cans out the car window. He had been drinking while driving. That small detail was the only clue that could help me stop him before he hit Olivia Wu. So when I saw him again, when I saw that same hand tossing a can out the window, I stepped on the gas, following close behind and honking hard to draw attention. I didn't expect that single action to trigger something inside him. He suddenly sped up, swerving wildly toward a small square ahead. I accelerated too, trying to block his path before he reached the crowd. But in that fleeting second, for reasons I still can't explain, my mind flashed back to the movie I never finished. And I realized I'd never get to know how it ended. That late spring afternoon, I'd skipped class to visit my mother in the hospital. The room was quiet. She was still asleep. I walked to the other side of the bed, meaning to sit and read for a while, when I noticed something on the small bedside table. A plate of neatly cut fruit and beside it, a pure white paper crane. I froze, staring for a moment. Just then my mother stirred and opened her eyes. She smiled gently at me and said, "That little white paper crane. Olivia folded it for me."